Our tale begins with the dawn of mankind, a savage and proud race constantly at war. Exhausted by the never-ending conflict, one man petitioned his god for an answer, and was presented with a sword forged in the center of the earth, imbued with the power to unite humankind. Aware of the pure force in his hands, the man never wielded it in battle, but instead used it as a beacon of hope, under which all of the factions of his race began to at last find peace. Humanity became a strong and noble race, flourishing in the light of freedom from war. Unknown to the peaceful peoples it once united, the sword itself had become thirsty for the chaos it defeated in eons past, and twisted the minds of those closest to it to once again take up arms. In the hands of a few, the sword waged a new kind of battle, and all of humankind stood in awe of its ferocity. Man began to understand that the sword would not stop until it had consumed every soul on the planet, and in one final battle the forces of good rose up to defend themselves. But in a world that had once been built upon the foundations of hatred, the sword found endless strength, and all who stood against it were decimated. Finally, one man remained, and in an effort to stop the sword once and for all, he plunged it through his own heart. Hundreds of thousands of years into the future, our story takes us into the life of the mercenary Lacertus, scanning the cosmos in search of smuggling jobs and expensive historical artifacts to sell on the black market. His ship happened upon a deserted planet, and there he found the sword, in the middle of a sea of skeletons and embedded within the chest of a perfectly preserved human. Unable to resist himself, Lacey took the sword and in one instant felt every soul that had died upon the blade, and was transported to the realm in which they abound, waiting for the day when the sword would finally be destroyed and they will be released from purgatory. With sword in hand, the mercenary Lacey met with the most villainous force in the universe, the General of the Dark Army. More demon than human, the General had lived for thousands of years, and had spent those years instilling fear into every galaxy he came across. His name was whispered with venomous disdain in every blackened corner of the natural world, and it could not have made him happier. Every man shivered in the presence of this malevolent being, but not Lacey, for the sword had seen and consumed more evil than the General ever would, and there is nothing the sword loves more than obtaining the soul of an old and truly corrupted entity. After his meeting with the General, Lacey had been hired to infiltrate the planet of Entel, an oppressed world whose mountains and valleys were rich with winter stone, the most coveted fuel source in the known universe. The General desired it purely for himself and his enormous armada, and it was up to Lacey and his mercenary band to gain the trust of the local rebel army. Firmly under the thumb of the fuel corporations, the entire population had been put to work in the mines and factories, but some had decided to fight back. Refusing to wage all-out war and risk destroying the precious planet, the General hoped Lacey would be able to crush the rebels from within, and leave the planet defenseless against any military invasion. Unfortunately for Lacey, his sense of moral responsibility began to clash with his job requirements, and when the General finally came to claim the planet, he did not find a crushed and hopeless society, but a well-organized military force led by the man he hired to destroy them. The rebel army of Entel had risen to the challenge presented by the General of the Dark Army: surrender the planet or die. In the valleys of the precious Magdith Mountains, the rebels fought to win their freedom from oppression once and for all. Lacey fought against his employer for the people of Entel, but the sword follows no standard. As the battle raged, Lacey began to lose his hold on himself, and before long the man gave way to the demon. When the dust settled, Lacey was the only one left, save the two men who saw it coming and hid themselves away, Lacey's first mate and his navigator. Crushed by what he had done, Lacey lay amongst those he had slain and knew that he must flee so far away no civilization would be near enough to tempt him. The two survivors looked on, and seeing that their friend had become an unstoppable powerhouse, they knew they had no choice but to alert the only force that could stop him, the Galactic Guard. After having murdered friend and foe in the battle for Entel, Lacey sank into despair. The sword completely consumed him to the point of no control, and caused him to destroy everything: his friends, his lover, even his ship. Now, with no sense of identity and the power of the sword seeping into the very marrow of his bones, Lacey collapsed under the weight of his own self-hatred and pity. He ran from everything, taking with him the Dark General's massive fleet of ships, which he had rightly won, and retreated to a long-abandoned planet hidden within a star system with no name. It would only be a matter of time before the Galactic Guard heard of the power he holds, and there would be no stopping them from coming to take it. But Lacey was in no state of mind to protect himself. His thoughts were turned inward, to the conflict of egos within. Drowning in the depths of his own misery, Lacey's depression worsened, and yet the sword would not let him take his own life. Appearing suddenly from the abyss, a ship entered the atmosphere of his planet, holding only one man, an old wise soul with no home but the stars. Somehow he knew everything, and convinced Lacey to take up the power he had been given and rule the universe. According to the Outlander, it was Lacey's destiny. Finally renewed with ambition, Lacey cast his sorrows aside and devised a plan. Newly invigorated and confident in his path, Lacey began to build a stronghold worthy of the weapon he possessed. Using the space fleet gained after the battle with the general, he weaponized the entire planet. Emerging from the desolation of the decrepit Earth, Lacey prepared for war with the largest army in the known universe. Out of the ashes rose a city of iron, a fortress of steel. Solidified by the strength Lacey found within himself, he moved to take up his seat as the most powerful human alive. As mankind ventured out of the Milky Way galaxy and into worlds beyond, an army was created to patrol the stars. At first motivated by the quest for justice in an ever-expanding realm, the Galactic Guard united every planet, every galaxy in the knowledge that someone would protect them when trouble came. Yet as time moved on and the violence became amplified by the vastness of space, the Guard became swayed by money and power. As soldiers abused their authority and citizens grew to fear rather than respect, the corruption of the Guard was soon complete. Little more than mercenaries for hire, the Galactic Guard lost its way. Although they were the largest army known to man, they moved only when it was in their best interest, or when money was on the table. The fall of the Galactic Guard was long and hard, and affected every human being. At last, the Galactic Guard had arrived on Lacey's doorstep and the battle was joined. With weaponry far more advanced than anything we mere mortals could comprehend, planets and soldiers alike became the casualties of war. Stars were brought to the brink of supernova in the attempt to destroy one another's forces. For years the conflict raged, until at last Lacey took up the sword one last time, in the hopes that it would unleash the power he needed to win once and for all. Fighting furiously through the forces of the Galactic Guard, Lacey tore a pathway through space-time, and abandoning all caution he passed from one world into another. But the journey is long and arduous, and takes a toll on both his mind and soul. Only time will tell what awaits the mercenary Lacey as he hurtles through the space between dimensions under the watchful gaze of fate.